Hello guys and welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about Michael Misa, one of the projected top picks in the 2025 NHL draft. And just like we do with Matthew Schaefer, we're going to talk about the teams that I think need him the most. I think especially with the conversations of Hagens dropping in this draft, with Martone, Frendell also being in a similar range, I think Michael Misa has solidified himself as the best forward in this draft class, and rightfully so. But which teams do I think will fit the best with Misa going forward? Which teams are desperate for a centerman like that? Well, let's talk about that here today. So make sure you watch till the end for all the team needs and all the prospect talk, and hit that subscribe button if you're new for more prospect content just like this as we lead up to the draft. Oh my gosh, in just a couple of months. Time is fake. Now, I don't think I need to gush about Michael Misa more on this channel. I made a whole video about why he is my #1 prospect in the 2025 draft, but for the rundown, there's a lot to talk about. As a former exceptional status forward, he is somebody that now, especially this season, has lived up to that potential. You can see what he's been able to do for Saginaw as the captain there in the OHL. In 65 games, 62 goals, 72 assists for 134 points. I mean, if Gavin McKenna didn't exist, I think we'd be talking about Michael Misa so much more, because what he is doing is unbelievable for a draft year player. It still boggles my mind that there's not enough attention brought onto, especially a player like Misa, that this draft gets labeled as a really weak one when a player like Misa is doing what he's doing with the projectability that he has. He's so smart in all three zones, is supporting his teammates so well in every situation, is just a perfect leader on the ice. In every single spot, he's just doing the right things, creating the right plays, and making things easier for everybody around him. He's something that I just adore for the way he goes out there and just puts up results almost every single shift. Even if he doesn't score, you can never really see the Misa's making major mistakes out there, or that you would have major problems for what he was doing, because there isn't. Almost every single shift, Michael Misa is doing the right things, and I think that'll especially lead on to the NHL, where his vision, the creativity, especially on the rush and what he's able to do there, there's just so much to like. You combine the creativity, you combine how good his vision is, how good he is up the ice with the puck on his stick, and also how good he is without it on his stick, how good of a defensive player he can be too. And to me, there's just so much translatability here with Misa that will be almost an automatic top 6 centerman. I think that's really his floor, and his ceiling there, I think, is a franchise type of centerman if it all pans out. And I also like the versatility as well. I think he can play in the wing in the NHL and do pretty well, though I think with his strengths, with his smarts, and how balanced of a player he is, he does translate better as a center long term, especially with his size and the physicality that is improving over the course of the season. And to me, I think if you want to have him as a center, which most teams should, that's where you're going to have him. Now, going through the Tankathon race for that first overall pick, I'm actually going to share 12 teams here today that I think make the most sense for Michael Misa. But I wanted to share this because I think in honestly Misa's case, there's a couple of situations here where it's less straightforward than a Schaefer would be. And in Misa's case as well, there's a couple of teams in the top 10 and one team in the top 5, I'll say, that isn't even my top 12 Misa fits. 4 teams here that I'm not going to have in the top 12, even though they would still take Michael Misa, obviously. I think they go in a different direction in terms of potentially position or player style. Those 4 teams are the Columbus Blue Jackets, the Utah Hockey Club, the Anaheim Ducks, and the Seattle Kraken. It might be surprising to have a team like Seattle that would be up that high, that would say no to a player like Misa, but honestly, I think they're a team that is completely fine in the center position. Berkeley, Ken, Shane Wright, Matty Beniers. If they take another center, I might freak. Starting us out in the number 12 position, though, and the team I think needs Michael Misa, I guess, the 12th most, I'm going to go on to the Detroit Red Wings here, and they're a team that does just make it. I do think they have a lot of center options. I mean, you're already seeing some of the youth coming in Marco Kasper and just how good he's been, and of course, Dylan Larkin, who I think is a solid first-line center. Maybe they could use Michael Misa for a little bit more star power, but I think they can survive without it. And really, I think the Red Wings, youth-wise, are doing pretty well in the center position. You got Marco Kasper, who I already mentioned, but you got Nate Danielson, who I think will be a solid middle sixer as well. Max Plant, who's looking pretty good as a second-rounder last year, doing some really good things in the NCAA already. Amadeus Lombardi, who's always been a pretty big favorite of mine. Solid pick as a 4th-rounder back in 2022 and doing some good things over in the AHL. So even though there's nobody at Michael Misa's level, I think for the Red Wings, they're pretty set in the center position, and I'd like to see them going after potentially a right D in this draft. That, to me, is what makes more sense. And with how many links the Red Wings also have to the NTDP and USA Hockey, I wouldn't be surprised if maybe they don't prefer a player like James Hagens, but maybe stylistically with his more pure skill-based game, that's maybe something they prefer. Even though I think Michael Misa will be the better overall player, a guy like Hagens could be kind of that first line, all offense, while Dylan Larkin can shelter outside of that. Maybe that's how they'd look at it, but I think Misa would still be a good fit for Detroit, but not the best in terms of the teams available. Now on to number 11, and this is where I'm going to have the New York Islanders. Now, personally for me, I think the Islanders could really use a player like Misa, but I think they could also really use a player like a Matthew Schaefer or a James Hagens as well. I think in Misa's case, he'd be pretty excellent there, but also considering the Islanders and how many center prospects they have, especially after this deadline, I think they could survive without it. But I will say, I think the Islanders would have been quite a bit higher if it weren't for this last trade deadline, where of course they acquired Cal Ritchie in the huge Brock Nelson deal. I think this really helps the Islanders long term. I mean, you already got players like Bo Horvat, and Barzal has played center in the past, even though I think he's a winger in the future. Ritchie, though, really gives them a top 6 center element going forward, and I think that is huge for them. So even though Misa will be really exceptional, I think Cal Ritchie could be quite good there. And you also have Danny Nelson, Camille Bednarik, 2 guys who I see being solid bottom 6 centermen as well. So the center situation for the Islanders isn't horrible long term, though they still have a lot of work to do, I would say, outside of that, especially on the defensive side going forward. But I think in the center position, especially with Ritchie there, it's going to be quite decent. Now, getting us started with the top 10, and this is a team that was a little bit lower than I was expecting, but honestly, I just don't see as a huge need for a player like Michael Misa, and that is the San Jose Sharks. Now, I think a big reason for this is that the Sharks still, I think, could really use at least a second-line center going forward, and of course, the mix of Chernyshov and Misa has been exceptional in the OHL this year. Both of those players getting the most out of each other. If it wasn't for how good that duo is, I think the Sharks could be maybe a little bit lower, honestly. They already have a player that I think is really similar to what Misa is in Macklin Celebrini, somebody that is so smart, so collected, but also brings so much skill in tight and really is able to handle that physical pressure well. That's pretty similar to what Misa is able to provide. I don't think Misa is going to be as good as Celebrini has been, but I think he's up that alley. I think for the Sharks, maybe getting somebody that's more of a pure offensive second line center could be better for them going forward. Celebrini, of course, still with a lot of offense to provide, but you know what I mean. In Misa's case, I think it's a little bit too similar, but obviously if the Sharks still drafted him, they would love to have that type of player. I think it would be really interesting to have 2 centermen like Celebrini and Misa that are so similar and can go out there and do the exact same things. That maybe is something that San Jose wants, but I think in terms of diversity, maybe a player like Hagens makes more sense. Now, as I mentioned in the prospect pool video, the Sharks, of course, are pretty high, but I do think there are some things they can really improve on in that prospect pool. Like I talked about getting a second-line center for the future. Will Smith was maybe looking like that for a little bit, but I think he really fits better as a wing long-term, and I'm glad the Sharks are doing that because it seems to be better for his career, which does leave a spot open, though. You do have Philip Bystedt, who I think is the best pure centerman in the system, something that's done quite solidly in the AHL, but I think projects more as a solid third-line center rather than somebody you can really depend upon to play top 6 minutes. You also got Brandon Svoboda, Cameron Lund, some guys that are solid centers, but I don't think anybody is going to be able to play those top 6 minutes definitively and really push that position. In a player like Misa's case, he can obviously do that, but I think a player like Hagens, especially behind a player like Celebrini, would be really great for both of those players' careers. Now onto the team that I think needs Michael Misa the 9th most. So let's go on to the Calgary Flames. Now, we talked about the fit, of course, with Chernyshov and Misa. I propose to you Misa and Zane Parekh continuing to be on the same team going forward, on the same power play. Yes, please. I think for the Calgary Flames, it's pretty clear why they're in a higher spot than San Jose. That's because San Jose already has their franchise #1 centerman. For Calgary, I think that is something that they could sorely use. Now, I think that prospect pool is severely underrated, has a lot of quality names, so I think they'll be okay. But if they can land a player like Misa, I think that completely changes their trajectory. From a team that looks solid for the future and really quite good, to a team that I think could be undeniably good. I mean, their drafting, especially in the last couple of years, has been terrific, but this year especially. I mean, even if it's a lower-end player, if you take a risk on a player like Roger McQueen, I think that could be interesting. Michael Misa, though, I think transforms that franchise, and alongside Zane Parekh, I think gives them 2 definitive superstars in the future. Really, I think that's the main weakness in this Flames pool is that center position, because you got guys that I think could play in the future. Samuel Honzek can play that, but I think he might be more effective as a wing. Same thing with Luke Misa, who's been a pretty great center in the OHL, but I think has limits towards his speed, and that might affect how he's actually able to translate going forward. I think for them especially, even if it isn't a player like Misa, just getting a center in this draft might be the top priority for them. They already have some good names coming up, but with Misa especially, on top of getting Luke Misa as well, I mean, I didn't even think about that. I went throughout this video not even thinking about the brother connection there. Having the brothers together with Zane Parekh as well, I would love that so much. Now, going on to a team that I think it might depend on your view of them in the future in the prospect pool, let's go on to the Vancouver Canucks, who I think are a team that really desperately could use some lottery luck. They have some pretty good prospects coming up. Jonathan Lekkerimäki, Tom Willander, Elias Pettersson 2.0. Love those guys. But I especially look at the center position, and it is bleak. And it really gets worse when you look at the prospect pool too, because a lot of their prospects on the wing and defensive side of things. Ty Mueller is somebody I mentioned, and he's been actually pretty good in the AHL this year. But after that, I mean, the next best option is maybe Damon Gardner, but he has 14 points in the NCAA this year. I don't think he's going to be doing too much for you long term. So honestly, I've convinced myself, send Misa to Vancouver or else things might get rough pretty soon here. Now on to number 7, and this is where I'm going to have the Buffalo Sabres. Now on paper for some people, it might not be as high as this, but I do want to mention that for Buffalo, the center position has changed quite a bit for them recently. I mean, you have a player like Yuri Kulik playing as their first line center now, but it seems like to get the best results out of Tage Thompson this year, they've placed him on the wing, and it seems to have been working pretty well. So similar to his position like the Islanders, putting Barzal on the wing to get the most results, it seems like Thompson long-term will be a winger. Now, in terms of the center position, prospect pool-wise, it's actually not too bad. You got some names that I really quite like. Consta Helenius, of course, is one, and even though he could still be a winger, I think center is where the value of his smarts and defensive ability is really going to be. He's had a pretty solid start to the AHL season, still at 18 years old, so that's pretty good to watch for the future. You also got Anton Wahlberg as well in the AHL, Noah Ostlund, too, with Rochester, though I think there is a clear obvious lack of somebody that can bring the stabilization that Misa provides while also bringing the pure offense, because Noah Ostlund I think is a pretty great offensive prospect, but there's going to be a lot that you'll really need to shelter him with. And I think for Buffalo especially, they're a team that just needs to improve so much in the defensive category and with the maturity that they have, and Michael Misa I think could do that from day one. And really, I look throughout that Buffalo team, and even though there's some really great players like Tage Thompson, guys like JJ Peterka, and Zach Benson, I think will be quite solid going forward, I don't think there's anybody that is at a franchise type of level. Somebody that's going to be one of the best top 5, top 10 players in the NHL. I don't know if Misa's going to be quite that, but I think he could get closer than anybody on the roster. Tage Thompson, of course, is the closest, but all their top draft picks have been spent, of course, on defensemen, the Rasmus Dahlins, the Owen Powers. A player like Misa, I think, could do so much damage for that Buffalo team, and with how much of a leader he's already been, with how much he's carried lines and carried everybody he plays with, that's exactly the type of presence I think Buffalo needs. At number 6, let's move on to a team similar to the Vancouver Canucks in the New York Rangers, who find themselves in a strange spot. To me, for the Rangers especially, they're a team that is just in and out of this rebuilding mode, contending mode. They're not really being all that successful in either of them. And even though they have some great quality pieces, some great potential, they never seem to live up to it. They're a team that I talked about in the potential rebuild tier list, where I could see a situation where the Rangers, a couple of years down the line, need to rebuild so badly because of the hole that they've dug themselves in. I really don't see much of a future there with guys like Mika Zibanejad and Vincent Trocheck. They're solid players, but nothing that is at an elite level, especially compared to what Artemi Panarin has been able to do consistently. And I think for them, especially with how old they've become, I just don't think the Rangers are going to be in a position to truly contend, especially with how much of just a bloodbath that Eastern Conference is. And a player like Michael Misa would be transformative. It would give them a talent that they've never had before, and I think he's so good that even the Rangers development team couldn't mess him up. Now, getting us started with the top 5, and this is where I'm going to have the Chicago Blackhawks. Now, personally for me, I think Chicago will be able to survive if they don't get a player like Michael Misa. But I think what a player like Misa could do is really complete that Chicago forward group going forward. You see, of course, that Chicago's already gotten their center situation lined up now. You got Connor Bedard, Frank Nazar, Oliver Moore. I like all 3 of those players, obviously. So much talent to be brought out there. But I think there is a situation where a player like Bedard especially might be more advantageous to the wing, might get more results there, especially with the defensive play not being where people want it to be. I think for Bedard as a winger, he could do exactly what he needs to do, rifle pucks, worry about scoring, because that's what he's best at. I just imagine a situation for Chicago where you could have Bedard on the wing, then have a center core of Misa, Nazar, Moore, and just how much skill there is there, while also bringing the defensive ability. And that, to me, could be just so interesting for Chicago's future. For me as a Stars fan, I obviously don't want to see it, but I think it really completes their forward group. They need more size, they need more defensive acumen, and Michael Misa brings that. On to number 4, though, and a team that we've seen recently really tumble down the standings, and that is the Boston Bruins. I mean, as of right now, they actually have a pretty decent chance of moving up in the lottery. They currently have the 5th best odds for first overall at 8.5, which really shows how bad they have been since the deadline. And I think in terms of their center situation, they could really need it. Still, though, even though the Bruins have a couple of center prospects out there, they really do need somebody to come in quick to this team and change their fortunes. And I don't think there's anybody that's more NHL ready, more mature, and could more easily step into an NHL lineup and succeed than Michael Misa. He, to me, is already such an NHL product, and especially for a team like the Bruins, who I would assume don't want to go in this lengthy rebuild, Misa's perfect. Speaking of teams that could really use a player like Michael Misa, let's get now into the top 3 and go on to the Philadelphia Flyers. Now, they're a situation where it depends on really how you view the prospect pool already. I love Jet Luchenko. I think he's a really underrated prospect. The smarts there are just great to watch, but I think he tops out as a pretty solid second-line center who can really drive play well and shut down things when he needs to. A player like Michael Misa, though, is transcendent, and that's the exact type of centerman you want to play a pair with Matvei Michkov long term, who can not just feed him the puck, but also keep up with him in terms of skill, intensity, and the opportunistic style he has. There is so much there that I think Philadelphia could really get a lot from. Having Michkov and having Misa on the same line would be straight magical. Now let's move on to the team that was number 1 in the teams that I thought needed Matthew Schaefer the most. Let's go on to the Pittsburgh Penguins, and holy crap, if they were to get a Michael Misa, forget about it. He would instantly become a star. I think for the Penguins long term, especially if they were to get that first overall pick, I do think they go for Matthew Schaefer instead, just because of how much of a need a true transformative defenseman is for them. But I mean, it would be hard to pass up on a player like Misa, who could be right under Sidney Crosby's wing and really bring the offense there immediately, especially considering a lot of the draft picks they made recently, and also some of the trades, going for Rutger McGrody and giving away Braden Yeager, a center there. I think they're in a position where they could really use a top 6 center for the future, and I think a center in really every situation is what they'll likely target no matter what. But that's, of course, if they don't get first overall, because I think for Pittsburgh, if it's second and another team takes Matthew Schaefer, they're going to run up to the podium to select Michael Misa, but I do think they come in second just because I think Schaefer would be more of a priority than Misa would be. But hey, either of them works. I think either of them would be perfect Pittsburgh Penguins. But on to the team that I believe in the lottery race needs Michael Misa the most. Another team that was pretty high up in the Matthew Schaefer ranks, so really, I think long term they could use everything, and that is the Nashville Predators. To me, in terms of team need going forward, in terms of the prospect pool, in terms of just how much they need to turn that franchise around, Michael Misa is exactly what the doctor ordered. To me, it's for a few reasons here. That center situation is quite rough right now. Steven Stamkos, Ryan O'Reilly, those are 2 older presences that I think could bring a player like Misa under their wing, but at the same time, they're not what they used to be, and they could really use somebody that brings more juice, that can play with a Philip Forsberg and keep up with him in terms of the skill set there immediately, and Misa would be perfect. He would get so much opportunity there already, would be immediately, I think, as their first line center, and I think for the Preds, we talked about that in a situation with the Bruins as well, how they want to get a player like a Misa who could be NHL ready immediately. Well, I think for the Preds, they're in the exact same situation. I think this year is something they do not want to repeat for how much they've been trying to get competitive, for how much they put into being competitive this year. I will say they have a couple of decent center prospects coming up. Fyodor Svechkov, I think, will bring some solid defensive ability. Igor Sharin is also pretty decent as well, but nothing that I think is even close to Michael Misa's level, especially in the offensive department. That's exactly what Nashville could really use, and Misa especially, I think, would be really thriving there if he were to go there. Now, before we go, I want to give a quick shout out to today's sponsor in BetUS TV. If you're looking to make picks on the playoffs, the NHL draft, as well as really every game out there, make sure you head over to BetUS TV. And a big thank you for them for sponsoring today's video. That's going to be it for me, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. Really, the 10-1 range was so interesting and so close. And it's really going to be an interesting race to see who gets Michael Misa, who ends up picking Matthew Schaefer. This draft still has a lot of questions to answer, and we're going to be answering them on this channel all throughout this process. So thank you guys for tuning in. If you enjoyed, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, comment down below your thoughts on who you think needs Michael Misa the most, and make sure you share it with all the hockey fans you guys know online. Click on this card for all my 2025 draft content right in one playlist, and I will see you in the next one, y'all. Have a fantastic hockey day, and goodbye.